I'm indebted to Elizabeth for the instructions about how to make a thread. She said that you needed to choose some pleasing natural fibers, moisten them, and then twist them. And the physics of the twist holds the thread together. Everybody here has their own version of the last 2 days. Everybody here has got your own thread to bring home with you. And I just want to talk to you for a little bit about mine. Marlon just did a fantastic job of recognizing the changes that are happening around you. All over the world, it is now legitimate for governments to deliberate about what kind of lives we can afford for our fellow citizens. It's not an Ontario problem or a Canadian problem. It's a worldwide difficulty about how to manage an unsustainable set of policies. There are also changes inside the changes. The now person-directed planning is not just an invention of a few people. It's something that's metered and measured and defined and regulated. And there's forms. In the midst of all these changes, we need to think about common threads. William Stafford wrote a poem called "The Thread." There is a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see sometimes. When you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. So I would pick, for me, 3 strands to make my thread from the conference. And the first strand is the dignity of vulnerable humanity. The dignity of vulnerable humanity. We, to broadly overgeneralize, live in a culture that would like to deny that would like to sort of hold up the self-sufficient individual as the kind of model of what it is to be a human being. And we would imagine services as helping people to become those individuals who don't need any help or anybody, but as William Stafford says, that's sort of false to the human experience. The dignity of vulnerable humanity is expressed in people's being, people's simple being. And it involves people's higher purposes, people's gifts, people's passions, and especially our fallibility, our inability to not quite get it the way we want it, to keep trying to invent ways to make it the way we want it, to keep trying to invent managerial systems and structures that'll give us control of our systems and our destiny. And we are born vulnerable, we die vulnerably, and in between, we experience our vulnerability every time we have the courage to notice it. Suffering and loss are simply part of life. And so is agency, so is making what it's possible to make with what's around you, whether you're 5 mothers in Romania working out a scheme to support one another, to support one another's offspring, or whether you're people in a place like Ontario where huge amounts of money by world standards kind of slosh through our service system, and some of them seem to land in good places, and we've heard a number of wonderful stories about the good places that some of that wealth has landed, and some of which keeps landing in very strange places from the point of view of celebrating the vulnerability and the dignity of our humanity. So that'd be my first thread. The second one, Michelle summed up. If I was smart, I probably wouldn't say any more about it than what she just said a little while ago. We need everybody. And for some of my friends here, the South African theological idea, the idea of Ubuntu, is what captures this we need everybody. The only way to survive our vulnerability in a sustainable way is to recognize that vulnerability and its gifts in relationship. I am because we are. And that means that we need to think about and serve our interdependency. My friend Peter Dill, who lived this thoroughly, wrote this a bit before his death. No matter where we are in life, Peter says, no matter where we are in life, no matter what position we hold, we are engaged in a constant search for new dreams, a new awareness, a hope unfulfilled. Not in the way the ego requires, which has to do with power, recognition, material reward, but in terms of happiness and doing good for one another. We need to continue to learn, to be awakened to more of the goodness of life. And this strand in my thread is all about awakening to the nature of our dependency on each other, to the nature of our need for each other. This is a thread that is about a conscious and intentional search for more interesting and more resourceful relationships. Many service relationships now, as the world succumbs to the illusion that we can manage care, that we can kind of dole it out in 15-minute increments tied to specific tasks connected to assessed needs. All that illusion, all that fantasy exhausts the meaning in relationship. The staff people who have to deliver things in 15-minute metered increments don't really have much of a very interesting relationship, and the people who spend most of their time trying to assure that that people are complying with the rules and following their behavior plan and following their risk management plan, those aren't necessarily very interesting relationships. And they're certainly not resourceful relationships because they make everybody dependent on an impersonal system. That, I think, is one of the roots of the unsustainability of what we are struggling with now. And I'm afraid that our desire to flee from the lessons of Ubuntu, from the lessons of we need each other. That flight is dangerous to people with disabilities, especially to people with more severe impairments, because those people become profoundly inconvenient because they just raised the question for us in a way that we can't but confront. Is this person a contributing citizen? What will it take for this person to make a positive difference to other people and to create meaning with other people? If that requires an investment of money, is that investment legitimate? So we're now actually trying to work out, in my friend Jenny Morris from the UK, from England's words the other day, we're trying to work out what kind of disabled people we can afford. Right? And the big question, of course, is what if you're unaffordable? What if you're insufficiently able? Along this string is also the notion of gratitude and forgiveness, because that's the only way we can survive our fallibility. We keep, sometimes I think, looking for the perfect technique, right? The tool for the design of independent facilitation that will extinguish conflict of interest and enable facilitators to leap tall buildings at a single bound. We keep trying to come up with what's the ideal way to assure that there's no conflict between parents and their children. This is quite a remarkable undertaking if you stop to think about it. But we don't typically stop to think about it because we're not paying enough attention to the fact that we need each other. We open doors for each other. Richard talked the other day about Malcolm Jeffries opening the door for him, literally opening the door to listen to him when he was in, as he put it, big trouble. Right? Sit down with him and say, what's going on? What do you really want to do? What do you want to make happen? How can we help? Right? So the thread of Ubuntu is all about opening doors for each other, creating opportunities for each other. And conversation in sort of intentional circles to support and generate change. So that's the second thread. The third is hunger for justice. And my sense of that is a society in which making inclusive friendships and contributing citizenship less difficult. A just society is one in which it's less difficult to make and keep friends, and it's less difficult for people to be contributing citizens. And that, as far as I can work out, is a human history long struggle, which is unlikely, in my sense of it anyway, to finish up in my lifetime. I think it's unlikely ever to be a struggle that finishes up because our vulnerability scares us so much. Our interdependency scares us so much that we keep making up ways to make it harder to be contributing citizens and to be friends. So we need to be purposeful about resisting those pressures in our culture that lead us to try to flee from our need for each other, for the dignity of our vulnerability, and the hunger we have for justice. By denial, we'll come up with the right policy or pass the right law. I'm all for passing the right laws, by the way, but sometimes we just imagine that we could legislate our way out of mortality, and I find that not likely. We need to resist cynicism and fear, and the illusion of command and control. We have some sort of simple practices that we've been talking about that appear to me to be meaningful. We gather, as people always have, intentionally to weave our experience into a meaningful story, to make sense of moments that break open possibility for us, either moments that are caused by loss and by grief, or moments that are caused by disappointment and defeat, or moments that are caused by suddenly recognizing, as somebody put up here on the story vine, that it had never ever occurred to me to imagine that people might have a preference about what sort of toothpaste I put in their mouth when I was brushing their teeth. It never ever occurred to me, and we had yesterday several people refer to epiphanies, to those kind of moments at which things break open for you. And we need to figure out ways to kind of make sense of that and incorporate that discontinuity in our awareness into our stories. We also gather to explore the possibilities for contribution and to align alliances and assistance in the action that we need to take in order to learn. And when we were thinking together about that really critical thread, a couple things occurred to me. One of them, and I'm greatly indebted to Richard for this because he summarized very succinctly what it takes to have this kind of conversation. He said, you gotta get people together. This is not something you do by yourself. You gotta turn on imagination, looking for models in the stories of other people, watching Wayne Gretzky. Gotta turn on your imagination. It's important to take your time. And this is one of the places where we've got a kind of a rub with a government policy that wants to meter facilitation, right? That they need to meter their expenditure somehow. But if we're not careful, we'll be on system time instead of on human change time. We'll be in the world of chronos instead of kairos. We won't be looking for the moment that is there to be fulfilled. We'll be trying to figure out how to get the next documentation in. Richard said, we need each other to keep our dreams alive. Smallness gets things done when you build on it, and you need to use what you have to create the new. Now, we have, as Michael Small reminded us, we've all got assumptions, and lots of our assumptions are encoded in the pictures behind our words. Our words are part of a metaphor, they're part of a picture. Here's what I mean. I listen to the words person-directed planning and am puzzled by them because I think there's a couple different metaphors, there's a couple different pictures that those words could fit in. And one of them worries the bejesus out of me. The one that worries me is the idea that people would imagine that person-directed planning was an isolated person passing out orders, right? That seems like a pretty sad situation. I have a couple of grandchildren, and their father and I are doing everything we can to turn them into the nerds that Mary Kovacs wants to harness for good purpose for people with disabilities. So they're little, but they've had Legos to play with since they were tiny, and they've just gotten the gear to make a logo program, a computer program that runs the Legos in a very, very simple and inexpensive version, I'll add. And they just find this incredible, that they can kind of make those little cars jump up and down and run around and give them. But sometimes I think that sometimes people imagine that person-centered, person-directed planning doesn't happen in the spirit of Ubuntu, doesn't happen in the spirit of us needing each other. So it's about isolated people dictating. And because, sadly, I see most people with developmental disabilities and most of their families as having very little power in any real terms, as controlling relatively little that gives you genuine leverage, right? Compared to the nursing home industry or the banks. That's just telling me I got 10 minutes left and this will only take 5. You know, compared to the banks and the military and the nursing home industry, we got not a lot of that kind of power. The power we've got is the power of recognizing the dignity of our common vulnerability, of recognizing our interdependence, of being willing to act to satisfy a little bit more of our hunger for justice, and being willing to live with the terrible imperfection of our efforts. So that's one picture, right? The robot master. And sadly, that could end up with the person having a hell of a lot of control about who's in the room and what method you use and all that kind of stuff and what you talk about, and no control at all, no influence at all over the person's life. So in that word picture, I'm in trouble. But if you look at it another way, you could think about, what about a group of people gathered together like the cast of the community theater wanting to put on a play? And what if you thought about direction in terms of the poor devil who's taken on the task of directing that cast, right, with their strengths and talents and weaknesses, and this one can't quite sing quite right without going flat, but somehow or other we got to figure out how to get the best possible performance to express who we are in our community. That sense of person-directed makes more sense to me. You'll find your own metaphors, and maybe my worry about the isolated person issuing orders was just my misunderstanding of it, but I think we've got something to think about there. So we got some things to learn. We got some things to learn. One of them is, I think, if I've been listening well, how to create and protect space to simply be with people. And that's not efficient, right? That is not at all efficient. That is probably a poor use of the taxpayers' money, and if the taxpayers find out, they'll tar and feather us. So by God, we're not going to waste time with people. The spirit of Ubuntu is a spirit of wasted time, right? It's a spirit of hanging out. It's a spirit of figuring out, okay, we've talked about this enough. Now we all got to get up and go out and, God help us, try to do something that probably won't come out exactly the way we want, or even maybe close. But we got to be counted. We got to be out there and have a go. So we need to create and protect space to be with one another, and we've got to create space to protect the real time that it takes for real change to happen. We've also, Judith McGill named something for me that I've been really struggling with for a long time, and I'm very grateful. When she talked yesterday about how to re-story hardened stories, stories that people with disabilities themselves and families themselves sometimes, and certainly often staff people, have internalized, that kind of set the limits not out there, but in us, and how we help how we help each other to discover new narratives, not just about us as individuals, but more importantly about us in common, about what do we want to create together, what do we want to make happen together. So we need to learn about that. We've also got a lot of people whose stories are just shrunk, right? People have like shrunk life down to fit inside what's on offer, and how we kind of ignite imagination around that. Seems like an important thing to keep learning more about. We need to figure out how to encourage each other, so we've got the courage to stand up and try stuff. We got to figure out, we said to each other, this isn't my agenda, this is my version of what I heard from everybody. We got to figure out how to tell our stories more influentially. Some of our stories you kind of have to be an insider to get, right? So we need to figure out how to make our stories bigger, because it's pretty clear, it's increasingly clear to me as my birthdays go by, that lots of the issues that our society is facing and the unsustainability of our current system, and particularly the logic of our current system, is rooted in the demands of elders, right? There's way more elders who become disabled in consequence of aging than there are people with developmental disabilities. And so that's what's scaring the crap out of our systems all over the world. It isn't us. We're just kind of swept along in the, in the wake of all this worry about us old guys blowing the budget. So we need to figure out how to tell our stories, because there's quite a lot that folks who support elders can learn. And then there's the question of our own elders, the folks with developmental disabilities whose need for support suddenly goes way up. And then somebody might decide they have to move into some kind of facility or other, because that's where you go when you have that level of need. That's truly, truly scary. So we need to figure out ways to better align public expenditure with the vast variety of lives that people would value living. We've said over and over again, there's no one way to be a contributing citizen. There's no one way to be a person. That's not what we're about. But we have a service system all over North America, all over the developed world, that wasn't developed to support individuals. Nobody was thinking about that. I know about that a little bit in Canada, because I was hanging out at the National Institute on, then called Mental Retardation, when we were dreaming up what a comprehensive community service system ought to look like. And it was all about groups of people. It wasn't about supporting individual people. In 1970, we were figuring we were doing a hell of a job if we just didn't have people in big, awful institutions. So we need to reimagine public investments that would genuinely support, and we know how to do that. You know how to do that here in Ontario pretty well. It's just a question of trusting people enough to genuinely give them the money. We have to keep expanding the number of people who benefit. We need to keep asking ourselves, who am I not meeting as I'm doing these plans? What about those folks where we've made a trade-off between technology and preserving knowledge? So we have this epidemic, apparently, of G-tubes, right? As opposed to preserving the knowledge and the skill that's required to position people, to help people to eat in an enjoyable way, right? We don't want to stop at not choke. We want to get to, this was a great meal. And we had, terrific contact in it. How do we make sure that we're not losing people? So, 3 threads. Recognizing the dignity of vulnerable humanity, recognizing how much we need each other, and that's not a sort of sappy, hippie, leftover idea, but the most fundamental reality of human survival. And letting our hunger for justice encourage us to act. William Stafford's poem, The Thread. There is a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. When you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread.